Hi, welcome back to the channel. The dominance of the US dollar. So in this video, I want to talk about the dominance of the US dollar and how this advantages the US in a number of situations. So for many decades, the US dollar has been the dominant currency of the world. A lot of trade is done in dollars, and countries settle a lot of their debts in dollars. And this is one of the main reasons the US did a deal with Saudi Arabia to price oil in dollars. So any oil trading around the world is generally settled in dollars, and other trade followed that settlement in dollars. Now this has given the US a massive advantage in that it's seen as a safe and stable currency because it's the world's reserve currency. And due to this, it's allowed the US to pretty much have an economic policy that is only available to them. So one of the things this has allowed them to do is sort of print pretty much unlimited amounts of money. And if you look at the actual debt of the US, it currently runs at about $29 trillion. Now, pretty much other countries would not be able to do that, and they simply can do that because they have the benefit of the US dollar being the reserve currency. Now, what they've used that money for in some circumstances is to actually fight wars around the world, and fighting those wars has helped maintain that dominance of the US dollar. And another thing is that what you find is countries with large trade surpluses like Japan and China, they actually buy up with those spare dollars, they buy up US Treasury bonds, which in turn keeps that credit to the US rolling. Of course, China and Japan earn reasonably good rates of return on that borrowing to the US because they have very little else they can do with those dollars. So China earns billions of dollars a year in interest payments from the US for that money they borrow it. Now currently the holdings for China of US Treasury bonds are a little over $1 trillion. They have sort of decreased or stabilized from a few years ago where the holdings were higher. But I see there's a sort of trend of not sort of significantly increasing those holdings. Now the other thing that having the US dollar as the reserve currency brings is a trading system of money transfer called SWIFT. And this is an American operated system that allows transfer of the money around the world for settlement of trade basically. And a number of times the US have used this SWIFT as a weapon. They've actually cut countries off from using that. And just to name just a few countries they've stopped from using this SWIFT system. So there's Afghanistan, there's Cambodia, there's Cuba, Syria, Venezuela and Iran. And this really causes a lot of problems for those countries not allowed to use that SWIFT system. So obviously, due to the escalating trade tensions and sort of some people would say Cold War between China and the US, China have felt vulnerable to also being cut off from this SWIFT system. So for the last 3 or 4 years, they have been working on what's called the digital yuan. And I think the Chinese ambitions are to roll this digital yuan out. First of all, they've trialed it in a number of cities here in China, and it's widely thought that it will go nationwide in 2022 to coincide with the holding of the Winter Olympic Games. But I think further out after that, they will then try to roll it out to get other countries to use it as a settlement for trade with China. And we actually saw this recently with Myanmar, although it's not the digital yuan yet. China have allowed Myanmar to start using sort of small transactions to settle trade in Chinese yuan because of the unrest in Myanmar created by a US puppet government there. Myanmar have been struggling because they've been cut off from the US dollar. And something else that's occurred that's interesting in the last few days is that there was a video summit between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin of Russia. Now, interestingly, this bit of news has not been widely reported in the Western media. I think that's because it goes against the narrative. But what they discussed is having closer ties to create a financial system of trading and settlement that cannot be interfered with by third-party countries. And I think pretty much by that third-party countries, they mean the USA. And I think that if they go ahead with this, which it seems they're going to, that many other countries would be very interested. And I think in the sort of medium term, in the next 5 to 10 years, you could possibly see the Chinese yuan becoming a much bigger player in global markets. I think there's a lot of countries who, if they can adopt this as opposed to the US dollar, then they free themselves from being financially bullied by the USA. Now, in turn, because of the USA's huge debt, if a lot of countries stop buying up US Treasury bonds, basically refinancing the USA's debt, the US will find themselves in sort of deep trouble. And inflation will rise, and they really, if they have nobody to finance the debt, the currency will become less and less valuable, and that's a big issue for the USA. So I think that the USA will be doing all they can to keep their currency as the dominant currency in the world. But I see it myself as more and more countries will turn away from that as they have alternatives. And as I've always said in many of my videos, I see China as a very strategic player. They really play the long game, and I think this is very different to the US and the West, who tend to be very knee-jerk in their policies. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think about this subject down in the comments. As I always say, don't just read the headlines, look at the facts, do your own research. But as always, for now, take care.